Welcome to the Wealth Acceleration Podcast with your host, wealth coach Wade Reed.
Hey, what is up, Money Masters? My name is Wade Reed. I am so glad to be back with you for another episode of the Wealth Acceleration Podcast. And today is going to be story day. Okay, I have a really interesting story that has hyper relevance to today's environment that we are all dealing with. And what I mean by that is we have political upheaval going on, a great division between these two parties politically. We have an election happening, which creates great turmoil in the economic environment we're all dealing with. There's hyperinflation that's been happening as a result of COVID and spending things that took place with our government choices and all the printed money that's been happening. And I want to bring some insight to how to deal with that stuff, because it's not the first time it's happened. In fact, during my lifetime, it's the second time that this has happened or something similar to it. And of course, prior to that, it's happened before and it's happened before and it's happened before. What we have to know about the economy and politics is that things are cyclical. We're not the first to go through it. And so if we look historically at what has happened, we can, in effect, make better choices moving forward and know that if others have gone through it, so can we. So I had an opportunity to go to lunch with my dad this week. And in those lunches, we typically just kind of shoot the bull, have some nice conversation, have a nice meal, spend some time together, and it's just a nice bonding experience. This time, however, I felt impressed. I needed to ask a question. And the question I asked my dad was related to exactly what I just described there. Dad, how have you handled over the years during your adult life tough financial times? How have you dealt with inflation? How have you dealt with political upheaval? How have you dealt with economic changes? You know, we had Nixon in the late 70s who took us off the gold standard, which led to hyperinflation for about a decade and lots of concerns about the economy and supply of food and fuel. There were times when there were fuel rationing happening. How did you deal with that? What about times in your life when you were raising us as kids? How did you deal with times that were difficult financially? Like if things got tight with work or you were transitioning between work or something like that, what happened? You know, the divorce of my parents when I was 12. How did that impact things? And it was really fascinating as we had this discussion where he simply said, Wade, I don't really know what you're talking about. It really wasn't a difficult time financially. Of course, it was emotionally, but financially, it was really a non-issue for me. And I'm like, Dad, what do you mean it was a non-issue for you? Everyone had troubles financially during that time. He's like, well, not really. I don't remember feeling worried about money. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm a 42-year-old man with a family of 6 children, and I have felt some of that. I'm a money coach. Like, what did you do differently? And he said, well, Wade, I actually just follow the principles that I taught you. And he reminded me of this little box that he gave me when I was about 3, 4 years old. And that little box was a piggy bank, but it wasn't just a piggy bank with a single deposit into it. It had 3 different components. And one of those components was giving, one of those components was saving, and one of those components was spending. I said, Wade, I have always lived by those principles. And in that order, I give, I save, and then I live off the rest. The spending money is what's after I've set money aside to give back to society, give to church. The savings component of setting aside money for a rainy day, for car repair, for a new car purchase or down payment on a car, repairs around the house, dealing with a health crisis. I just always had money set aside. It was important to me to do that. And I said, well, Dad, where did you learn that? He said, well, I asked him to just think back as a youth, like what was it like in his house growing up? And he said his parents were a little bit less stable. His dad never really had a steady, consistent paycheck, but his mom did. She kind of kept the bills paid while his dad tried to figure things out. And this is me speaking, my view of that is that home life probably led him to have a greater desire towards stability. So his work life, my dad's work life was not entrepreneurial. He did not teach me about entrepreneurship. He taught me about stability. And again, this is me speaking as an adult looking back over my upbringing from him. The stability he brought to my life, I think, gave me the possibility of being a little more entrepreneurial, knowing that I had the principles in play that if I followed them, I could deal with some of the difficulties of the ups and downs of being in the entrepreneurial space. having a variable income, choosing my own path as opposed to working for somebody else and hoping that I can keep a salary coming in and maybe a mild increase of 3 to 5% a year, cost of living increases. So back to my father and the system that he followed, he said, Wade, spend, save, give. Wrong order. Give, save, spend. And I addressed this in my prior podcast, guys. The Systemized podcast dealt with this exact thing. And I said, Dad, I hear you. What did you actually do day to day? He's like, well, I actually had a green ledger sheet for a time. I had a physical piece of paper and I had physical envelopes that I put cash in to help divvy out the purposes of my money so that I wouldn't overspend. I literally lived off of cash. And I said, Dad, in today's world, that isn't really easy to do. We have credit cards and Venmo and PayPal and debit cards, and hardly anyone uses checks anymore, but sometimes those take place. And of course, we have cash. We have at least 6 different ways that we're transacting. I don't really see envelopes working that well. What are other ways to do that? Well, he said, eventually I started to use a spreadsheet. And I was pretty religious about keeping track of every penny on my spreadsheet, knowing that I set money aside for this, 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 and this. Those were my different reservoirs for different purposes, including setting money aside for a retirement. And then I only spent what I had left. I knew what I had and I only spent what I had. I was very careful about that. So guys, what's really interesting to me is personal finance is really that simple. It's really that simple, guys. The system is set some money aside to give and help and give back. Set some money aside for your own benefit. And this goes back to nature. And I've used the water cycle in my analogies over many, many years of talking with people. If you look at the water system, we have a cycle where water evaporates up into the clouds. The clouds then form into raindrops and give us nice rain in the summer. In the winter, for those who live in mountainous regions like myself, we have tons of snow that falls and gets stored up temporarily in the snow caps. And then when the spring weather comes, it starts to melt off. And if it's done properly, there's enough water to get us through the summer and grow our crops and create the nice green yards that we all enjoy, or most of us in the world. Some people in the arid countries have not countries, but part of the country like Arizona and southern Utah and so forth have more arid landscapes, but we need water to sustain life. And so as the water flows down, it doesn't all go away. It doesn't all go through the streams and rivers. Some of it gets stored up, right? There are ponds. There are natural bodies of water, lakes. There are also man-made bodies of water we call reservoirs. And those reservoirs we have come to know as a society, reservoirs are necessary, particularly in areas that are prone to drought, like the desert area of Salt Lake City and the Salt Lake Valley. We're a mountain desert. We're 4,500 feet above sea level, but largely we're a desert type climate. So we are concerned regularly for summer drought. The past decade or more has been seriously in a drought type environment. And if we didn't have reservoirs to capture that melting snow and preserve it so that we can have water available to fill our personal needs in our households, we would be in a really difficult place. So reservoirs, those are man-made reservoirs. Those are purpose-built reservoirs, recognizing that there are challenges that we all deal with. And so if we turn that back into money, a savings account is a reservoir. It's a man-made reservoir. It's a choice. It has a specific purpose. And so we need to have cash set aside for that exact purpose because we don't know when things will go badly. Now, back to my dad again, it's not to say things didn't go badly at some point, but he had reserves. And because he had reserves, he was in a position of power and a position of choice. He didn't have to go to credit cards. He didn't have to go beg to a bank or to other family members. He had set some money aside to deal with that unforeseen or forced upon him challenge. The economic environment, hyperinflation, increasing costs, high interest rates, all that stuff was happening in the 70s and early 80s. And it's again happening now in the early 20s. So guys, I want you to be empowered by this. I hope that you hear this story and don't say, oh my gosh, my situation is so different. Well, it's really not. It's as simple as track your financial life. It's that simple. Track your financial life. And again, go back to like personal health. If we're dealing with health, we might be gaining some weight that we don't want. The only way to know whether or not we're overeating is to track it. The only way we know if we're overspending in our business is to track it. This personal financial essentials course that I have that's about to launch it deals with this. It talks about the basics of business finance. What is the journal or the company books? What is an income statement or a profit and loss? What's a balance sheet? What's a cash flow statement? How does that all fit together? And how does that then apply to personal finance? It's a really simple course, really powerful though. And when we follow the simple things, great things come to pass. Great things come about. Simple, ordinary things bring great things about. And one of those simple things, guys, is tracking and planning your spending. Give, save, and then spend. And it's about the ratio of 10% to give, 10 to 20% to savings, and then live off the remaining 70%. If you can live within that, that's an objective, that's a goal. Of course, you may have to manage that according to where you live in the world. But that's the ideal. That's what we know works. And if you'll follow that, at least give it a try. Test this out, guys. Test my word. Test my father's experience. If you don't have the same type of experience, I'd love to hear. Leave some comments for me. Let me know what your challenges are, what your experience has been, because I'm talking about a 75-year-old. This guy's had a lot of experience. He's nearing the end of his life. 10, 20 years in that range statistically is about how long he has left to live. There's enough experience there to teach us a few lessons. And I'm just proud to have had an upbringing like that. I recognize it's not normal. Apparently not everyone gets that sort of upbringing where they have that little box that says spend, save, give, and are taught from a young age the way I was. But I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. And I'm trying to impart that to you guys so that you can have a better financial future, so that you don't have the same worry and doubt and fear that your peers will have, because you are sound with how you manage money. You are consistent with how you track and plan your spending, and that you have money in savings. In fact, I thought I might do this in a totally separate podcast, but I feel inclined that this needs to come out here in this podcast. I was in a client meeting yesterday, and that client meeting, they were kind of lamenting about the first 2 quarters of this year, because from 2008 to the present time, everything has been hunky-dory. They've always been on an increasing trajectory with their business. Things have been going very, very well. They had their peak year last year, and then come around this year, they anticipated having the same or better year because the environment they're in, they're very well established in their business where they're at. And they said, man, Wade, the environment has changed. Jobs that we would normally get, we're getting undercut by newbies who are less skilled and who are going to do inferior work than we would be doing. But people are just, they're letting other people do the jobs that we would normally get. It's been really frustrating. People are delaying their payments to us. Said, man, the economy is different. Things are different. All right. So I was asking my client, what did you do about this? And they said, Wade, we're just so grateful we followed the advice from when you first started with us about debt. They were paying down $4,000 a month toward one particular mortgage and had very limited amounts of money in the bank. I said, look, guys, I know that's a great objective for you and I'm not opposed to it. What I am concerned about, though, is the timing and the method with which you're doing it. Wouldn't it make more sense to take that $4,000 a month you're putting toward extra principal on your mortgage and just set it aside in a savings account so that it builds up and builds up and builds up? And if you happen to have an even better opportunity that will earn you a lot more, such as reinvesting in your business, hiring somebody, you can have that money available to do it and have multiple choices with it rather than just one, which is put it toward the mortgage and lose access to it completely. I said, Wade, I think that makes a lot of sense. We're going to do that. So they stopped making extra payments toward their mortgage. Well, fast forward now about a year, they said, Wade, because of that choice, we had cash that we've been able to deal with this crisis. It's been really hard still. We've been concerned about making payments, but we've been able to draw on that reserve. And it has been a non-issue, an absolute non-issue. Yes, it's been emotionally taxing, but it's been a non-issue financially. We had the money there available. So guys, I just reiterate, reserves are crucial. A lot of people in the world will tell you cash is wasteful. Don't have money in cash. It's not earning anything. It's not outpacing inflation. Well, that's not its purpose. A reservoir isn't to be a lake of enjoyment. It's to be there in case something happens, because it always does. We just don't know when. So guys, follow the system, get some reserves in place, and have great confidence. You're free when you're spending less than you're making, when you're living within your means. You're literally free when you're spending less than you're making. Love you guys. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wealth Acceleration Podcast. We hope the insights from today's episode help you streamline your finances and grow your wealth stress-free. For show notes from today's episode and more tips on creating a comprehensive wealth-building plan, visit moneymasterycoaching.com. Remember, financial freedom is attainable. Until next time, keep accelerating towards your goals. See you on the next episode.